And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, this is November 27th, the 331st day of the year. 34 days remain to the year's over with. And let me be among the many to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving Day. Yes, it is Thanksgiving. But in addition to being Thanksgiving, it's also Turtle Adoption Day, National Family Health History Day, and Lancashire Day. And let's not forget National Bavarian Cream Pie Day, turkey-free Thanksgiving in many places. A lot of folks depart from the tradition by switching to a Thanksgiving meal that's kinder to the animals, to the planet, and to your health. Pins and Needles Day, National Craft Jerky Day, What Do You Love About America Day, Unthanksgiving Day in many places. It's also called the Indigenous Peoples Sunrise Gathering. Unfolds each year on Alcatraz Island. As the first light breaks and people gather to honor native cultures and their combined presence, there's drumming and dancing and prayers that fill the air, creating a powerful moment of unity and remembrance. This gathering began in 1975, marking the occupation of Alcatraz by native activists years earlier. And since that time, it's grown into a space where indigenous voices speak out and traditions thrive and history is acknowledged. There's also the National Day of Mourning. Let's not forget the sacrifices of the native ancestors who paved the way for their traditions and heritage to thrive. Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade is on this date. National Bible Week, National Book Week, National Deal Week, and National Tree Week. Let's not forget Artes Mundi, which goes on until Sunday, March the 1st. National Game and Puzzle Week, Battle Conversations Week, and Blue Christmas. While most people are at home opening presents, emergency workers are on duty, ensuring the safety of their communities over the holidays. And that goes from today, the 27th of November, to Wednesday, December 31st. Famous people born on this date, Bruce Lee and Jimi Hendrix, both of whom are well known to people. Let us go to the stories we have in the news. And my system has decided it's going to go on strike. Well, yesterday, there were 2 National Guard soldiers in Washington, D.C. who were supposedly murdered. And the alleged National Guard shooter actually worked with U.S. government entities in Afghanistan, including the CIA. He was an Afghan national, accused of shooting the 2 National Guard members just blocks from the White House. And he had worked with various U.S. government entities, including the CIA, as a member of a partner force in Afghanistan. That's according to Fox News. Ramanullah Hudnall, 29, entered the U.S. on the heels of a disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan in August of 2021. That was under the Biden administration. Arrived in the U.S. a month later under Operation Allies Welcome. Intelligence sources have told news sources that Hudnall had a prior relationship with various entities in the U.S. government, including the CIA, due to his work as a member of a partner force in Kandahar. And in the wake of the disastrous Biden withdrawal from Afghanistan, the Biden administration justified bringing the alleged shooter to the U.S. in September 2021 due to his prior work with the U.S. government. as a member of this partner force in Kandahar that ended shortly following the chaotic evacuation. That's according to CIA Director John Ratcliffe. This individual and so many others should have never been allowed to come here, he said. Our citizens and service members deserve far better than to endure the ongoing fallout from the Biden administration's catastrophic failures. The multiple high-level intelligence sources have told news outlets that the shooting is being investigated as a possible act of international terrorism. FBI officials confirmed 2 West Virginia National Guardsmen do remain in critical condition. In an online address to the nation late on Wednesday, President Donald Trump called the shooting a savage attack and described how one of the guardsmen was just shot point blank in a monstrous ambush-style attack just steps away from the White House. And he said this heinous assault was an act of evil, an act of hatred, an act of terror, crime against our entire nation, crime against humanity. There's still a lot of secrets from the chaotic evacuation. Well, the White House has blasted MS Now correspondents beyond sick reaction to the D.C. shooting of National Guardsmen. The MS Now correspondent Ken Delanian, his initial reaction to Wednesday's shooting of the National Guard troops in Washington, D.C. He appeared during the network's breaking news coverage and was asked about the environment in D.C. since President Trump deployed the National Guard earlier this year. And he responded by noting how the National Guard's presence has been normalized and is no longer seen as controversial after D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser embraced the deployment. And then he pivoted to the political climate around the country. He said, of course, there's so much controversy happening in the U.S. right now with ICE, who's also wearing uniforms and wearing masks. And so there's, people walking around with uniforms in an American city. There's some Americans that might object to that, and apparently this shooting has happened. The Turin Delanian also questioned the legality of the National Guard's deployment in D.C., citing a federal judge's ruling that was unlawful, which the Trump administration is appealing. And the White House's rapid response team slammed Delanian's comments on social media. According to the White House, these 2 heroes just were shot protecting our nation's capital, and this is your takeaway. Democrats have relentlessly demonized these patriots, calling them illegal, and even suggested they might start shooting Americans. Well, there's still a lot of questions to be asked about this shooting and a lot of answers to be gotten. Well, Virginia Democrat says Trump administration has taken its eye off the ball on public safety amid the National Guard shooting. Representative James Walkinshaw, Democrat of Virginia, accused the Trump administration of taking the eye off the ball on public safety after the D.C. shooting. Earlier Wednesday, 2 West Virginia National Guard members were critically wounded in the shooting just blocks from the White House. Authorities said the attack appeared to be targeted, and the FBI is investigating it as an act of terrorism. While appearing on CNN's The Lead with Jake Tapper, Walkinshaw was asked about whether the recent shooting changed his thoughts about the safety of National Guard officers deployed in the city. And he said, as he said in the past, most of us certainly on the Democratic side in Congress don't think we should have National Guardsmen and women in the city. But that's going to happen, and when that's going to happen, I think it's incumbent on the administration to lay out a clear plan to ensure their protection. Well, part of the problem is everything gets politicized these days, especially by the Democrats. But LAX travelers have abandoned cars and walked to the airport as protesters have blocked the buildings during the Thanksgiving rush. The holiday travelers heading to Los Angeles International Airport faced severe disruptions as hundreds of protesters had blocked the roads outside during one of the busiest travel periods of the year, according to reports. Demonstrations brought traffic outside the main airport building to a standstill, forcing people to abandon their cars and walk to the airport to catch their flights on time. And on Tuesday, the protesters marched onto Century Boulevard, blocking a major entrance to the airport and shutting down traffic around LAX's major pickup and drop-off zones. Police and riot gear arrived and cleared the intersection shortly after 6:15 p.m., gradually allowing traffic to resume. According to Fox News, another protest broke out at Terminal 7 on Wednesday morning involving workers from USWW, the nation's largest security officers union. At the center of the protest, outside the airport's an escalating labor dispute with Flying Food Group, one of LAX's largest airline catering contractors. Yes, nothing but excitement these days. UFO documentary is pull back the curtain on psychological operation after decades of government cover-up, according to experts. Decades-long mystery surrounding strange unknown objects spotted throughout the skies has long remained under classification and shielded from the American public. But the shroud of secrecy is being removed in a new documentary. It's entitled The Age of Disclosure. For a very long time, the public, Congress, and even the president have been kept out of the loop on this subject, according to director Dan Farah. In the last few years, senior members of Congress, senior members of the administration, thanks to whistleblowers, have found out what's been going on, and they're now in the pursuit of the truth for themselves and for the American people. Filmed over the course of 3 years, the documentary includes interviews with 34 senior members of the U.S. government, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, to pull back the curtain on an alleged 80-year global cover-up of non-human intelligence potentially existing on other planets. According to Farah, every single person he's interviewed makes it clear that it's no longer a question of whether this was a real situation. It's actually a very real situation. And he said the interviewees featured in the film each had direct knowledge of this issue, while insisting each individual has extreme credibility. Well, it's going to be interesting to see if this continues or if the curtain gets pulled back. Well, common sleep problems have been tied to serious neurological disorders in a major new study. Then they found a notable connection between untreated sleep apnea and increased risk of Parkinson's disease. A team of researchers from Oregon Health and Science University studied more than 11 million veterans aged 40s and older who don't already have Parkinson's disease. Some of them have been diagnosed with obstructive sleep apnea, a condition in which breathing repeatedly stops and starts during sleep. Researchers in track 2 went on to develop Parkinson's over an average of nearly 5 years. They also examined veterans who began continuous positive airway pressure therapy within 2 years of their sleep apnea diagnosis, searching for any difference in Parkinson's outcome compared with those who delayed or never started continuous positive airway pressure. In fact, when I was diagnosed by the VA, they gave me a CPAP machine, which has been very useful. Let's see. Congress is investigating betting scandals rocking the NBA and Major League Baseball after federal charges. Odds are the most Thanksgiving dinners will include a heaping helping of Packers-Lions, side of Chiefs-Cowboys, a run back to the fridge for a plate of stuffing alongside the nightcap game of Bengals and Ravens. Veritable football smorgasbord has been paired with mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and a slab of pumpkin pie. My wife makes the best pumpkin pie. But the real side dish to go with the games may be your wagers. Drop the dark meat, put your money where your mouth is. More and more Americans are putting bets on practically anything related to sports. You can take the over-under on individual games or see if the Lions cover the point spread. But a lot of fans are now lured by very specific bets. You can wager money on how many passing attempts Lamar Jackson has or how many penalties the Lions will commit. A lot of folks bet on how many times they'll show Taylor Swift on the screen during the Chiefs contest. American Gaming Association says sportsbooks scored a staggering $13.71 billion in revenue last year. Heightened gambling interest is what worries lawmakers. And a number of astonishing scandals have recently rocked the NBA and Major League Baseball. Well, we've also got Apple projected to beat Samsung in the smartphone shipments for the first time since 2011. Shipments of some iPhones are expected to grow 10% in 2025 as upgrade cycles each inflection point. Apple smartphone shipments in 2025 are expected to top Samsung's for the first time in over 10 years and becomes the world's leading seller of smartphones once again, according to a new report. Let's see. There's even a study out about what's the best time to eat Thanksgiving dinner. Billions of Americans will be sitting down for their dinner tables and celebrating Thanksgiving sometime between 2 and 4 p.m. Do you know the grand meal is called Thanksgiving dinner? The dining time often falls between lunch and dinner. A culinary expert and two health experts, there's an expert in everything these days, have weighed in. All of them affirm that mid-afternoon is the ideal eating time. Leonira Volta, professional chef at Hungry Root, told Fox News when crafting an elaborate Thanksgiving meal, timing is everything. Think of it like a restaurant. There's usually somebody coordinating when each dish goes out, so everything hits the table at the perfect temperature. For Thanksgiving, early afternoon tends to work best because most people start cooking in the morning. And turkey, which is generally the star of every Thanksgiving dinner, needs ample time to cook and rest. Turkey usually takes up the oven most of the day, and it needs to rest before being carved. And that rest time is perfect for crisping toppings and warming casseroles or reheating pre-cooked sides, so everything comes together beautifully. So home chefs should plan ahead, preparing cold and room temperature dishes ahead of time while taking hot food out of the oven as close to dinner time as possible. I remember my grandmother, who had one of those typical antebellum homes sitting on a hill, used to have a family reunion every Thanksgiving, and they'd be cooking for 2 days before. Well, there are 6 forgotten Thanksgiving dishes your grandparents actually served that have now disappeared from American tables. Thanksgiving may be a time for turkey, but for a lot of folks, the real stars of the holiday table have been the sides. While mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and mac and cheese might be the most popular dishes to pass around the table, the spreads of decades ago look very different. From oyster stuffing to rich gravies didn't let any part of the bird go to waste. Several dishes tell the story of how America used to cook and celebrate. The first one was oyster stuffing, as I said, called for combining shucked oysters and their brine with classic stuffing ingredients, including bread and celery and spices. This was a Thanksgiving staple in the 1800s when oysters were regularly available for purchase from refrigerated rail cars. Then it was ambrosia salad, often made with canned pineapple, mandarin oranges, marshmallows, and whipped topping. It was once considered a symbol of luxury on Thanksgiving tables in the 1800s and early 1900s. And though it's since fallen out of fashion, it remains a nostalgic Southern favorite. Then there's mashed turnips, once considered a poor man's vegetable. Turnips offered a slightly sweeter and less starchy alternative to potatoes and were mashed with butter and seasoned with a lighter, earthy alternative. Then there's corn pudding. Creamy custard-like mix of corn and eggs and cream and butter was once a Thanksgiving favorite, somewhere between cornbread and creamed corn. Dating back to pre-colonial times, corn pudding has many regional versions, from Pennsylvania Dutch recipes made with dried corn to New England's sweeter Indian pudding, which is made with molasses. And then there's giblet gravy, a traditional Thanksgiving gravy, I might add. Once got its rich, savory flavor from simmering giblets. Turkey's liver, heart, gizzard, and neck. The old-fashioned method faded from tradition partly because modern turkeys are sold without them, and store-bought gravy mixes have become more convenient. And there's cranberry fluff, a colorful mix of cranberries and marshmallows and applesauce and whipped cream. It was a popular 1960s and 1970s Thanksgiving treat that reflected the era's love of gelatin-based salads. It's a favorite in the South. It's often sprinkled with pecans and served right alongside the main dish. Well, there's been a lot of questions I've seen how the White House turkey pardon became an American tradition. This year, President Trump pardoned 2 turkeys Tuesday, one named Gobble and one named Waddle. It's part of the annual tradition that's occurred at the White House for more than 35 years. Thanksgiving turkey pardon is a ceremony originating from the National Thanksgiving Turkey Presentation dating back to the 1940s, when the National Turkey Federation would present the president with a live turkey for Thanksgiving. President Kennedy is often credited with pardoning the first turkey in 1963 when he said he had let this one grow. And although he didn't use the word pardon, LA Times reported on the matter in the headlines. Turkey gets presidential pardon, according to the NBC News Archive. President Reagan made a joke about pardoning that year's turkey, Charlie, in response to a question from a reporter. And Reagan said in 1987, if they'd given me a different answer on Charlie and his future, I would have pardoned him. The tradition was codified during the George H.W. Bush's administration, according to the White House Historical Association. Bush actually used the word pardon, and the tradition continued every year after that. Of course, you have to ask yourself if the last president actually pardoned a turkey, or if the pardon was issued by autopen. Well, Pope Leo XIV opened up the first foreign trip in Turkey with a visit to Christianity's early heartland. He's using his very first foreign trip to make a statement that blends symbolism with geopolitical consequences. Landed in Turkey this morning for the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea, and then into Lebanon's ongoing economic and political freefall. The Pope is stepping directly into places where Christianity once flourished. And his presence signals 2 messages at once: a bid to revive unity among Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant communities, and a warning to regional governments that persecution and instability will not go unnoticed. Early test of how he intends to yield the soft power of the papacy. Matthew Petrucek, Ph.D., Senior Director of the Word on Fire Institute, told Fox News that the trip sends a clear signal about the priorities of the new pontiff. Pope Leo signaled early in his papacy, and one of his primary objectives is to give hope to Christians who live in regions where they face persecution or other difficulties in living out their faith. When traveling to Turkey and Lebanon, he's telling Christians both in those countries and across the globe, you're not forgotten. The church is going to stand with you. Of course, when the bullets start, most of the papacy representatives run for cover. Well, the judge has ruled West Virginia's parents can use religious beliefs to opt out of school vaccine requirements. West Virginia judge ruled Wednesday that parents can use religious beliefs to opt out of school vaccine requirements for their children. Raleigh County Circuit Judge Michael Frobel on Wednesday issued a permanent injunction. Being one of God's anointed, of course, his word carries law. Says the children of families who object to the state's compulsory vaccination law on religious grounds will be permitted to attend school and participate in extracurricular sports. Frobel found that a state policy preventing parents from seeking religious exemptions violates the Equal Protection for Religion Act, signed into law in 2023 by then Governor Jim Justice. West Virginia was among just a handful of states to offer only medical exemptions from school vaccines when Governor Morrissey issued an executive order earlier this year allowing religious exemptions. We'll see how long that carries on. Well, Thanksgiving travel takes a treacherous turn as a lot of states are pummeled by snow. Got whiteout conditions in some states. According to Dr. Mark Siegel, faith and gratitude can still work wonders in a fractured nation. And yes, this nation is quite fractured. At a time of great political division, we need common ground to bring us back together. Most of us believe in miracles. Recent Gallup poll revealed that 3 in 4 Americans identify with a specific religious faith. The majority were Christians. Nearly half say that faith is very important in their lives. And it's believed that faith can be used to reunite us as a country. When we learn that somebody has miraculously survived a cardiac arrest, as NFL safety Damar Hamlin did on a football field in Cincinnati in 2023, or maybe a gunshot, as Representative Steve Scalise, a Republican of Louisiana, did on a baseball field in 2017. The last thing we need to think about is whether they're Republican or Democrat. Well, we're going to turn from our news and talk about our main topic. I've been talking about a lot of strange and unusual things. The last few shows have been about the Kennedy assassination. We're going to get back to that tomorrow. But for today, at the request of a number of listeners, I'm going to be talking about strange murders. We're not going to turn away from our murder topic. There's been a lot of unsolved murders, and some of them are just bizarre. This first story I'm going to talk about is, you might term it the green bicycle case, and it's the case of Annie Bella Wright, and it's been called the most fascinating murder mystery of the 20th century. Got all the hallmarks of a true classic of the unsolved genre. It mixes sex and a beautiful victim and a disgusting central villain. One of the most famous trials and acquittals of the golden age of British murder. Features the greatest barrister in British legal history and left everybody with a tantalizing mystery. The green bicycle murder has been pondered over by some of the greatest criminologists and crime historians of the past century. So it's about time that we talk about what you might term a fascinating unsolved mystery. Now, Annie Bella Wright, known simply as Bella to most folks, born on Wednesday the 14th of July in 1897 in the picturesque village of Stoughton in Leicestershire. She grew up in a picture postcard thatched cottage. Her parents worked on a local farm. They looked after the cows, and both were illiterate, but they wanted better for Bella, so they made sure she attended a village school until she was 12, where she learned to read and write. After she left school, took up a post as a domestic servant for the local landowner. This was right before the horrors of the First World War broke out. And she continued in her domestic service till 1917, when her employer encouraged her to leave her position as a domestic servant and take up a much more important role for the war effort. She began to work in a local factory, engaged in working for the British War Machine. By 1919, the war was over, and she found herself working for Bates Rubber Works at St. Mary's Mill in Leicestershire. She had fallen in the routine of riding her bicycle the 5 miles from her home in Stoughton to the mill in the nearby city center. And she worked what was termed a late shift, 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. And while at the factory, she met and befriended Sally and Gertrude Ward. And through these two young ladies, she began to go out with her brother Archie. He was a stoker for the HMS Diadem. Understood by both the Wright and Ward families that once Archie had been demobbed, as it was called, from the Navy, Bella and Archie would probably marry as soon as possible. Unfortunately for both of them, that never came to pass. On Saturday, the 5th of July, 1919, a little bit after 6 p.m., she left a little college she shared with her parents and brother in Stoughton. Told her mother she was going to ride her bicycle 1 mile to the village of Evington, where she intended to go to the local post office and buy a stamp so she could send a letter to Archie. And on the outskirts of Evington, she stopped briefly to chat with the local postmistress, a lady by the name of Mrs. Powers. She was out delivering letters, and after a brief conversation, it was agreed that rather than continue to the post office, Bella would give the money and the letter for the stamp to Ms. Powers. And Ms. Powers would get the stamp and put it on the letter for her. Well, after concluding her business with the postmistress, she turned her bicycle around and started back home. She arrived back at the family cottage and spoke briefly with her 17-year-old brother, Philip. Their mother was out, and Bella told Philip she was going to cycle the 4 miles to her Uncle George's house in the village of Galby. When she arrived at her Uncle George's Measure's house at about 7:30 in the evening, George's daughter, Margaret, and son-in-law, James Evans, were also visiting George Measures with their 2 infant children, 18-month-old Marjorie and newborn baby James Jr. Well, as Bella was visiting George Measures, he received a delivery of groceries. And as he was dealing with the delivery from Mr. and Ms. Palmer, he noticed a disreputable, scruffy-looking, unshaven, middle-aged man on a distinctive pea-green bicycle loitering outside his cottage. George asked Mr. and Ms. Palmer if the man on the pea-green bicycle was with them, but they said no, and informed George the man was in fact with Bella. The Palmers had seen Bella cycling with that man on the pea-green bicycle as they'd been making their deliveries. And it seemed that George Measures took this information in stride and didn't immediately question Bella about the man on the green bicycle. Then at about 8:15 in the evening, George Measures looked out of the window, and the man on the pea-green bicycle was still waiting patiently outside the cottage. At this point in time, George did talk to his niece about the loitering cyclist, and Bella appeared to be confused by the news and stated nobody should be waiting for her outside the cottage. Well, Bella got up from her seat and took a brief glance out the window, and she saw the scruffy-looking man was now pacing up and down outside the cottage. Well, that's when the confusion ended, and Bella confirmed the man was a cyclist who'd rode up alongside her. She made her way to the uncle's cottage and said, "Oh, him, I don't really know him at all. He's been riding alongside me for a few miles. He didn't bother me, just chatting about the weather." Well, at about 8:30 that evening, Bella decided to make her way home, and to her uncle's great relief, the loitering cyclist is now gone. Peculiarly, Bella discovered somebody had tampered with the rear wheel of her bicycle. Well, James Evans got a wrench from the cottage and diagnosed that a sprocket had been loosened. He retightened it. As they got on the bicycle and began to ride away, the loitering cyclist suddenly reappeared from the grounds of a nearby church. Pulled his bicycle to a stop in front of Bella, blocking her path, and admonished her for being so long at her uncle's. He said, "Bella, you've been a long time. I thought you'd gone the other way." The witnesses heard that man speak in a distinctive, peculiarly high-pitched voice, which was marked by a distinct Cockney London accent. Well, Bella's relatives are all taken back by the man. The scruffy man's overly familiar manner made everybody present believe that he wasn't a stranger to Bella, she had said, but in fact known only too well to her. And it seemed to be confirmed that Bella and the scruffy-looking man rode off together. Well, at 9:20 in the evening, a farmer named Joseph Cowell was herding cows along the Via Devana Road just south of the village of Stretton Parva. As he herded the cows toward the fields that surrounded Elm Farm, he discovered a young woman lying prostrate on the ground, her head and torso pointing toward the center of the road, and her legs lying up on the grass verge, her bicycle laying next to her. Quite clearly, she was dead. Blood was pouring from her nose. Of course, I would point out if she was still bleeding, her heart was still beating. Assuming the girl had fallen from her bicycle and hit her head, he picked up the body and moved it to the grassy verge so it was not blocking the road. And Farmer Cowell then picked up the bicycle and leaned it against a nearby gate post. And once he moved the obstructions, he led his cows over the crime scene and into a nearby field. Then he went back to his farm, got his horse and cart, and made his way to the police station nearby village of Great Glen. And along the way, he stopped at the home of two farmhands named Naylor and Deacon and dispatched them to guard the scene of the supposed accident. Well, by the time the police constable Alfred Hall arrived at the scene at 10:30 in the evening, darkness had fallen, and Farmer Cowell obligingly illuminated the scene using some old oil lamps. And Hall carried out a brief examination of the body. The left side of the face was covered in blood, and the left eye was bulging from its socket. The young woman's clothes weren't torn or disheveled, and her straw bonnet remained on her head. Hall then moved over to the bicycle, and when he examined it, he found several drops of blood upon one of the pedals. Then he told Naylor and Deacon to move the body and the bicycle and put him in the back of Farmer Cowell's cart. At 10:40 that evening, Dr. Edward Williams arrived at the scene. After a brief examination of the body, made the initial diagnosis of death by sudden hemorrhage. In other words, the young woman had fallen off her bicycle, hit her head, and died from the blood loss. And at that point, the body was transported to the old chapel in the village of Stretton Parva, where it was stored overnight. Well, Mary Ann Wright had a sleepless night that night, worrying about why her daughter hadn't come home. She knew it wasn't like Bella to stay out all night. And at the crack of dawn, she got dressed and made her way to the post office in Evington, where she had Ms. Powers telegraph the police in Leicester informing her missing daughter. P.C. Hall went back to the scene of the incident. No need for P.C. Hall to do so, as the incident had been labeled as an accident, but there was something about the whole affair that just didn't sit right with him. left a vague feeling of unease in the back of his head, which just wouldn't go away, like an itch he couldn't scratch. So he spent the day scouring the scene of the incident inch by inch, and his eye for detail paid off. A little after 6:30 in the evening on Sunday, the 6th of July, 1919, he discovered a spent .455 caliber bullet lying in the middle of the road, about 17 feet from where the body had been discovered. It had taken him so long to find the bullet because it had landed in a patch of muddy earth and been trampled down into the dirt by the cows that Farmer Cowell had paraded through the crime scene. P.C. Hall now realized he wasn't looking at a fatal accident, but a possible case of homicide. Examining the scene further, he found what looked like a bicycle tire track cutting through the metal, which ran parallel to the lane where the body had been found. And that track petered out about a quarter of a mile later where the metal reached an adjacent cornfield. So he began to wonder, was this the route the gunman had taken to escape the scene of the crime? After all, it would be a virtually perfect escape route, reducing the risk of being seen on the country lanes. So P.C. Hall went back to track down Dr. Williams so he could carry out a more detailed examination of the body. Found Dr. Williams walking the country lanes between the villages of Galby and Bilsden. Doctor's on his way to make a house call at the home of a sick patient. Dr. Williams told P.C. Hall he'd carry out his mission of mercy and meet P.C. Hall at the old chapel in Stretton Parva in about an hour. In the meantime, he advised P.C. Hall to go to the old chapel and begin washing away the blood off the dead girl's face. Certainly not the most scientific forensic examination. P.C. Hall arrived at the old chapel about 8 in the evening, collected a bowl of water, and began to wash the dried blood away from the dead girl's face. Once he had done this, he could clearly see a bullet wound beneath the left eye. When Dr. Williams arrived at about 8:30 in the evening, he examined the body once more, and this time he traced the trajectory of the bullet through the skull. It had been traveling in an upward trajectory and to the right. There was actually an exit wound discovered above the right ear. Corresponding hole had been discovered in the straw hat that the girl was wearing. By now, P.C. Hall had been informed about the woman had been reported missing from the village of Stoughton. Contacted the Wright family, and on the morning of Monday, the 7th of July, 1919, he escorted Mary Ann Wright to formally identify the body. And Ms. Wright did confirm the murdered girl was indeed Annie Bella Wright. After the body had been formally identified, Dr. Williams carried out a more detailed autopsy, assisted by Dr. Edgar Phillips. This confirmed the manner of death, and the killer had stood 6 to 7 feet from the murdered woman when the lethal shot was fired. Autopsy also proved that while Bella was not a virgin, she hadn't been raped or sexually assaulted by the killer. With the case now undoubtedly a murder investigation, Superintendent Levy Bowley and Superintendent Herbert Taylor were placed in charge of the case. Taylor had visited the scene of the crime with P.C. Hall, who walked him through where every item of evidence had been discovered. Superintendent Taylor noted several bloody stains on the gate leading to the meadow where it was believed the killer had fled. And following the route that the killer was believed to have taken, Superintendent Taylor found a dead crow with blood-stained feet and ordered the crow to be taken as evidence. It was a bizarre and macabre turn of events. An autopsy was actually conducted upon the crow to determine if its death is so close to the murder scene, it had any bearing on the case. It's important to note that, for later reference, that this examination discovered the crow had not been shot or injured in any way, and that its death appeared to have been due to the crow gorging itself to death on Bella's blood. Well, Superintendent Taylor interviewed George Measures and James and Margaret Evans. At this interview, he learned about the scruffy, unshaven man on the pea green bicycle who had seemingly been waiting for Bella. After conducting this interview, Superintendent Taylor arranged for hundreds of leaflets to be printed stating Bella Wright had been murdered, and the police wanted to trace a man described as being 35 to 40 years of age, broad, full face, and between 5'7" and 5'9" in height. He'd been wearing a gray suit, a gray cap, collar tie, and black boots. They actually offered a £5 reward to anybody who could give the police information that led to an arrest. And that would be in those days, £5 was the equivalent of about £150 today. Superintendent Taylor also sent a contingent of officers to local bicycle shops and mechanics to see if any of the business owners remembered selling or servicing a distinctive pea green bicycle. Well, with the news of this £5 reward, the story became front page news in the Leicester Mercury. Thursday, the 10th of July, 1919, a bicycle repairman by the name of Harry Cox read the reports and description of the suspect's bicycle and contacted the police. He informed Superintendent Levi Bowley that on Wednesday, the 9th of July, he had repaired the gear mechanism on a pea green BSA model bicycle. His owner matched the description of the suspect. He said his gentleman had given him his name, but he spoke with a curiously high-pitched voice marked with a Cockney accent. Now, that fact had been printed in the official description of the suspect. Customer told Mr. Cox he lived in London, was visiting friends in Leicestershire. Top brass realized the investigation was getting quite complex, and with the prime suspect possibly coming from London, they wouldn't have the resources to conduct such a sprawling investigation. So Superintendent Herbert Taylor contacted Scotland Yard and asked for their help. Chief Inspector Albert Hawkins was dispatched, and he was a bit of a legend in the history of Scotland Yard's. Within months of the green bicycle case, he became one of Scotland Yard's big four when he was promoted to the rank of superintendent and took over the running of Scotland Yard's famed criminal investigation department alongside Arthur Neal and Francis Carlin and Frederick Winsley. Well, between them, these four men transformed Scotland Yard from an antiquated plotting organization into using Victorian methods of detection into a sleek, modern investigative unit fit for the 20th century. Hawkins and his fellow superintendents ushered in the era of the super detectives, men who became almost as famous as the cases they investigated, having movies and TV series made about their exploits and writing million-copy selling memoirs. Indeed, it was Hawkins who spearheaded the age of the super detective. Hawkins became so famous himself when he died in 1929, it became international news, making it onto the front page of the New York Times, no less. Well, DCI Hawkins immediately set to work sending officers to carry out house-to-house inquiries in and around the villages on the outskirts of Leicestershire. Nothing came of these inquiries. Officers were sent out to interview the staff at Bates Rubber Works and Bella's known associates. They wanted to know if anybody knew Bella, having an inkling with the man who was described as the man on the pea green bicycle. Bella told some friends she was being pestered by a D-mob soldier who had a tendency to loiter on his bike in the country lanes on the outskirts of Leicester for her and insisted on escorting her home. They all said Bella hadn't seemed frightened by the man, just vexed. He found the attention flattering at first, but he's becoming a nuisance. Unfortunately for investigators, she never mentioned his name to anybody. In fact, that did come out during the police investigation. Bella wasn't as committed to poor old Archie Ward as she made out she was. Bella was an outrageous flirt and had been known to go with other men behind Archie's back. Indeed, she'd boasted to her mother that an army officer had fallen head over heels in love with her after she'd flirted with him, and he now wouldn't stop pestering her. This might have been the same man who'd been waiting for her in the country lanes that Bella had mentioned to her friends. Well, the police immediately asked themselves if news of Bella's flirtatious and possibly unfaithful behavior had reached the ears of Archie Ward. They thought he might secretly have made his way to Leicestershire and done away with his fiancée in a fit of jealous rage. So Archie Ward was summoned by Chief Inspector Hawkins for questioning, but it was clear he knew nothing about Bella's fate, and he had a cast-iron alibi for the evening of the murder. He was 150 miles away in Portsmouth. Well, police then began an intensive search for the countryside around the murder site in the hopes the killer had discarded the weapon. Rivers and dikes were dug, and fields and bushes were searched, and undergrowth was ripped up, and farms and outhouses were turned over. Search turned up nothing, unfortunately. In desperation, the police upped the reward for information to £20, or which would be £600 in today's money. Still, nobody came forward with the vital information the police needed. Well, on Friday, the 11th of July, 1919, Bella was laid to rest in the grounds of St. Mary's and All Saints Church in the village of Stoughton. Her murder so piqued the public's interest, thousands turned up around the country to pay their respects. The gathered mourners blocked the country roads leading from Leicester to the village and then thronged through the streets of the tiny village so they became unpassable. Chief Inspector Hawkins ensured there were plenty of plainclothes detectives milling amongst the crowd looking for the scruffy, unshaven man with the pea green bicycle. Unsurprisingly, the scruffy cyclist failed to make an appearance to pay his respects to the woman he had murdered. On Tuesday, the 8th of July, 1919, the inquest into Bella Wright's death opened in the village hall of Great Glen before the local coroner, Mr. Edmund Buskill. The inquest was a quick and perfunctory affair. Mary Ann Wright gave evidence she had positively identified the body as that of her daughter, and Joseph Cowell gave evidence as to the circumstances in which he had discovered the body. Proceedings were then adjourned till Friday the 25th of July in order to allow the police more time to make their inquiries. Inquest duly resumed Friday the 25th of July, where once again only 2 witnesses were called to give evidence, Dr. Edward Williams and Dr. Edgar Phillips. Both men gave evidence about the autopsy and the evidence gathered from the body. Dr. Williams confirmed he believed she had been shot from a distance of about 6 or 7 feet and the bullet had traveled in an upwards trajectory. After Dr. Williams gave his evidence, the inquest once again adjourned for a further 2 weeks so the police could carry out further inquiries. The inquest recommenced on Friday, the 8th of August. At this hearing, Margaret Evans gave evidence stating when the mysterious man on the pea green bicycle had approached Bella, Bella had blushed, and as a result, Margaret believed Bella had known the man, but been surprised to see him. Well, after this evidence, Mr. Buskell asked the coroner's jury to consider its verdict, and after a very brief deliberation, they returned a verdict of willful murder by person or persons unknown. Well, at the termination of proceedings, Coroner Buskell asked the press to issue a warning, while, as he understood, people might not wish to come forward and incriminate their loved ones. If they didn't do so, then they could face a charge of being an accessory after the fact. Well, at this point, the case came to a halt, but because there were no leads, no suspects other than the mysterious man with the pea green bicycle. Indeed, Sir Charles William Matthews, Q.C., the Director of Public Prosecutions, became so concerned at the little progress the police were making, he asked to see the case files on the murder of Bella Wright. After he viewed all the evidence, the police had gathered. Sir Charles sent a rather terse note to Scotland Yard, which concluded, "I have little hope the murderer ever be caught." Well, it was 7 months later before the inquiry made any further progress. On Monday, the 23rd of February, 1920, bargeman Enoch Whitehouse was making a delivery at St. Mary's Mill. He was guiding his horse-drawn barge on its slow, steady progress along the River Soar. And as he approached the wharf outside of St. Mary's Mill, his tow rope slipped into the water. So he began to try and pull the rope up from the depths that snagged on something lying on the riverbed. He hauled whatever it was to the surface, and lo and behold, it was a pea green bicycle, just like the one had been in all the papers all those months before. Bicycle sank back into the depths of the water, but Whitehouse made a note of the position and contacted the police. Police dredged the riverbed, and on Friday, the 27th of February, 1920, bicycles finally recovered in several broken down parts. Well, the bicycle recovered from the river was a BSA model, as James Evans and Harry Cox had identified. It was now missing its rear wheel. Serial number was needed to identify who the bicycle had been sold to, so Superintendent Bowley couldn't find any such number on the frame of the bicycle. Perplexed, Superintendent Bowley sent the bicycle to William Saunders, the BSA agent for Leicestershire, and he gravely informed Superintendent Bowley the serial number had been rather professionally filed off, and without it, any hope of tracing the owner was gone. So Superintendent Bowley left the bicycle with Saunders and informed him if he could think of anything that would help them to trace the owner, he'd be very grateful. In response, Saunders completely dismantled the bicycle on the off chance this was a custom-made model, which would mean there would be multiple serial numbers of different parts of the bicycle. And lo and behold, if on the inside of the handlebar tube it wasn't a series of 6 digits, 103648, the bike's serial numbers, turned out the bicycle had been a custom specialized commission, and therefore, in theory, it'd mean it would be easier to trace the owner. Well, Saunders immediately telephoned Superintendent Bowley and told him the good news. Next morning, Superintendent Bowley traveled to Redditch in Worcestershire in the office of the Birmingham Small Arms Company. This was the parent company of BSA Bicycles. And he talked with a clerk by the name of Albert Jenkins, who told Superintendent Bowley that the serial number is quite old, so he'd have to start with the ledgers, which commenced in 1916, and work his way back till they found the relevant serial numbers. One by one, Jenkins began to trawl through the ledgers, starting in 1916, and steadily worked his way back through hundreds of sales that had been made over the years. Finally, after what seemed like an interminable age, the answer revealed itself. The bike had been ordered on Thursday, the 3rd of May, 1910, by a dealer called Orton Brothers in Derby. Superintendent Bowley was a little perturbed. He'd expected the name of the person who bought the bicycle to be in the ledger. Revelation that they only had a vendor's name was a crushing disappointment. Bowley returned to his office with a brooding discontentment. but his mood lightened somewhat when he discovered that Orton Brothers was still in business. Despite the small glimmer of hope, Superintendent Bowley still remained somewhat pessimistic as to what will be the chances of the business keeping records of a sale made 10 years before. Well, on Wednesday, the 3rd of March, 1920, Superintendent Bowley traveled to Derby in the premises of Orton Brothers. There he met Joe Orton, who, to Superintendent Bowley's delight, had kept meticulous records of every single sale the company ever made since the business opened up. The bike had been a special commission by Mr. Ronald Light and cost £13 and 13 shillings. In today's money, that's roughly £1,000. And he had paid cash. And not only this, but Joe Orton had also had 2 addresses for Ronald Light. Not surprisingly, Ronald Light had moved on from the addresses he had been associated with in 1910, but by following a chain of forwarding addresses, the police was able to trace Light to a private boarding school called the Dean Close School, which sat on 50 acres of secluded countryside on the fringes of Cheltenham and Cotswold. He had taken up a position teaching mathematics in the year of 1920. Well, on Thursday, the 4th of March, 1920, Superintendent Herbert Taylor traveled the 80 miles to Cheltenham to interview Ronald Light. First met with Light in the company of the headmaster of Dean Close School, a man by the name of Dr. William Flecker. Superintendent Taylor was first taken back by how smartly dressed and rather dapper Light was, not at all like the scruffy, unshaven appearance the prime suspect had displayed on the day of the murder. But when Ronald Light opened his mouth and spoke in a peculiar squeaking, high-pitched voice tinged with a Cockney accent, Superintendent Taylor knew they had their man. Taylor quizzed Light about the whereabouts on the day of the murder, and Light confirmed he'd been staying with his mother at 54 High Street in Leicester at the time of the killing. Couldn't remember his exact movements on that day. When shown a picture of Bella Wright, Light denied ever having met Bella. Light was then asked if he had ever owned a distinctive pea green BSA bicycle. Stupidly, Light lied at that point and said he never owned such a vehicle. Entirely unsatisfied with his answers to the simple question, Superintendent Taylor ordered Light to accompany him to the police station in Cheltenham for further questioning. And though it was only a request, Light was under no illusions that it was a request he could not refuse. Well, at Cheltenham police station, the police had the bicycle repairman Harry Cox waiting. On his arrival at the police station, Light was immediately put in a police lineup, and Cox unhesitatingly picked Light out as the man who had brought the pea green BSA bicycle into his shop for repair on Wednesday, the 9th of July, 1919. In the interview, Ronald Light now tried to backpedal. He now remembered buying a pea green BSA bicycle from Orton Brothers in Derby in 1910, but he claimed he only owned it for a year before selling it to a gentleman named Charles Bourne who lived in Derby. Well, despite his denials, the evidence against Light began to mount up as George Measures and James Evans both picked him out of a police lineup, identifying him as a disheveled cyclist. And then Mary Elizabeth Webb, a companion and housemaid of Catherine Light, Ronald's mother, strengthened the case against Light by telling the police on the night of Saturday, the 5th of July, 1919, Light hadn't returned home to his mother's address until 10 p.m. That was extraordinarily late for Ronald Light to be out. Ms. Webb remembered the occasion as Light was usually in the habit of returning home for supper at 8 p.m. He'd explained his lateness by saying his bicycle had suffered a flat tire and he'd been forced to push it home for several miles. And Mary Webb also told the police that Ronald Light had burned or sold the clothes he'd been wearing on the day of Bella's murder, and by Christmas, the pea green bicycle had disappeared. Well, the police continued to dredge the river near where the bicycle had been found, and this paid dividends when a brown leather gun holster was discovered containing 2 dozen .455 bullets that matched the one used to shoot Bella. Well, Superintendent Taylor didn't believe a word of Ronald Light's continuing denials, and with the mounting evidence against the suspect, he charged Light with the murder of Annie Bella Wright. So who was this man that the police charged with Bella's murder? He was born in Leicester on Monday, the 19th of October, 1885, the only child of George and Catherine Light. He was a civil engineer, had been appointed the manager of Colville Colliery, George, the father, in Leicestershire. And he earned a very good wage, and Catherine inherited a great deal of money from her father, who had been a successful solicitor. And the family's wealth allowed young Ronald Light to be privately educated at Oakham Boarding School in Rutland. And he was a good student, but his behavior is far from exemplary. At the age of 17, while studying for his A-levels, he was expelled after he sexually assaulted a local girl who was just 8 years old. Details of this offense are few and far between, and it appears it was a conspiracy to cover up the unsavory conduct. Throughout his life, he was dogged by rumors of criminality and sexual deviance and improper behavior, but nothing was ever proven against him. After obtaining some city and guild qualifications, he attended the Birmingham University, where he obtained a degree in civil engineering. And after qualifying, he found work in November 1906 as a draftsman with the Midlands Railway at the Derby Works. In August of 1914, he was accused of drawing sexually explicit graffiti on the walls of the office toilet. After giving a warning about the graffiti, somebody attempted to burn the Derby Railway Works down by setting fire to a cupboard. And Light was once again the prime suspect for this act of criminality and immediately dismissed. Well, and then he got a job as a farm laborer, and not long after taking up the role, he had a disagreement with the farm owner, and shortly after that, attempted to set fire to the haystacks. He was a prime suspect for this activity and promptly given his marching orders. 1910, he joined the Territorial Army and assigned to the Royal Engineers when the First World War broke out. His position in the Territorial Army meant he was one of the first to be called up. Commissioned as second lieutenant, dispatched to the dreaded Western Front with the Royal Engineers. In July 1916, he got word his father died in an accident. In fact, he committed suicide by throwing himself out a window. Shortly after getting the news of his father's death, he took some compassionate leave and promptly committed a sexual assault on the postmistress of the village he was staying in. So, of course, he was stripped of his officer's commission, demoted to the rank of gunner, which was private, reassigned to the Honorable Artillery Company. Well, it was clear that the horrors of the trenches was having a detrimental effect on his mental health, and shortly after he got court-martialed. He was court-martialed for faking a telegram that rescinded an order to send his battalion to the front lines. The battalion, which allegedly had been sent by the commanding officer of the battalion, Lord Digby, was discovered to be a fake, and Light was discovered to be the forger. So he was sent back to England for psychiatric treatment, sent at the rest of the war in a psychiatric hospital in Sheffield. Later say he'd returned from the war a broken man. While being treated at the hospital, an ambulance driver at the hospital took pity on him and took to chatting to the obviously damaged soldier and offering him smokes. Over months, a tentative friendship formed between the two men. Eventually, the ambulance driver got permission for Light to have a day discharge from the hospital so he could go for dinner with the ambulance driver at his family home. While at the ambulance driver's home, he made some excuse and left. When his felt Light had out of the room for an order out of town, the ambulance driver went looking for him. Found Light in his daughter's bedroom trying to rape the 15-year-old. The matter was reported to the police, and they decided not to proceed with the matter, possibly due to Light's precarious mental state. So clearly, everything was saying that Light had done it. Well, the prosecution, when he brought the trial for the murder by Attorney General Sir Gordon Hewitt, Sir Gordon was the Liberal Member of Parliament for Leicestershire East and was appointed Solicitor General in 1916. Been promoted Attorney General in 1919. The defense was spearheaded by the famous Sir Edmund Marshall Hall, K.C., the Great Defender, the greatest barrister ever to rise to his feet in a British courtroom. He was a man who made cross-examination entertainment and helped to create what we now term the golden age of British murder. Came to national prominence by defending the accused in such seminal and famous cases as the Masonic poisoning case and the Yarmouth Beach murder and the Camden Town murder. And, well, much of the prosecution's testimony focused on the distinctive pea-green bicycle seen by a lot of witnesses. And there was a string of testimony from Joseph Ort and Albert Davies and others about the sale of that bicycle. Well, the brilliance of Sir Edmund's defense was he accepted the majority of the prosecution's case. Light now admitted the bicycle was his, and he admitted that he had been the disheveled man who'd cycled alongside Belden, and the gun and bullets were his. Testified in his own defense. Amazingly enough, he was found not guilty. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow, and once again, we'll be talking about stories that are strange and the unusual. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great Thanksgiving.